Welcome, everyone, to the Out on a Limb podcast, where we have a special guest today, Joshua Cameron, joining us from Utah. I've never been to Utah.
I've not.
But
I've been there.
Sounds interesting. But Joshua is an elite trained master healer who spent his life studying philosophy. But it wasn't until he was taught about spirituality from his mentor and his healing master that things truly clicked for him, like all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this allowed him to heal his own childhood trauma, which we'll get into a little bit today, and his wartime PTSD, which we will also get into because two of us are veterans and lots of our viewers are veterans as well. And so now his goal is to help others to do the same thing. Welcome, Joshua.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I couldn't help but hear your drawl a little bit when you said Utah.
Utah.
Yeah.
And it's
Aren't
funny,
you
my
out that way.
My formative language years till sixth grade were in Delaware. Then we moved to North Carolina, so it sort of cancels itself out. But I do have a little Southern.
Yeah, a little bit.
Kicks in every time. Yeah,
certain words will pop that out. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just out. Actually, we were just out in Arizona, Sedona area, so Flagstaff, all that area. So yeah, but not quite that far.
No.
Right.
No.
Right. So you had the pleasure of meeting Joshua.
Yes.
So why don't you start out by what you think our audience most wants to hear?
Well, it's kind of like my own thing because I'm personally intrigued, and I knew that I wanted to have a chance. And we could have done this off camera too, and I could have just drilled you with questions and stuff. But there's like so much that we had talked about in our conversation when you had done an interview with me, and there's a lot that you alluded to. And I never was it, it wasn't for me to interview you. So now I got you to do this. But I wanted to understand, because you keep talking about how you've healed yourself and how you use, healing with others. And I've been looking through all your stuff and I'm kind of going, I don't understand how he does it. So I'm curious about, what it is that you actually do for this healing process. And I'm curious about your journey, what caused you to even get on that track.
So why don't we start with your journey? Tell us about your childhood. What was it that caused you some pain there, or
if you feel comfortable talking about
it? Sure. Yeah. I was born and raised in the Salt Lake Valley. And as a young child, I was living in a little town called Riverton, Utah. And in that house, my stepdad was very much possessed of a, rageaholic, alcoholic, syndrome where the slightest things would set him off, right? He'd tell us to vacuum and comes in like, hey, did you vacuum? Like, right? What is a kid going to do? 6 or 7? Yeah, we did. And he looks and there's dirt on it. Like, no, you didn't. And then just beat us purple just because. And my mom, God bless her soul, was, a different person and also was lost at the bottom of a bottle. And so she couldn't come to our defense because she couldn't come to her own defense. And my grandfather at the time, was deep into tarot, astrology, would tell us the scariest ghost stories. And it always involved demons. He tell us about how he'd go to Brazil, digging for gold, and there's this big demon breathing fire in a cave, and it was so graphic. And it was very scary. It got to the point where, I don't know how often you guys would hear maybe footsteps. If you're in the basement of a house, you might hear footsteps like walking around. There's nobody in the house, and I'd hear that all the time. And because of the time, I grew up, or I was born in 1980, and that was around the time in the 80s that Unsolved Mysteries was spooky AF, and so my whole family would watch that. So I was just inundated with a lot of ideas around poltergeists and the supernatural, and so I was terrified of mirrors. I think part of that is because I didn't really have much self-esteem. So I think part of my subconscious understood that I was terrified of myself, but I was also terrified if something would wink into existence right behind me, because then what would I do? So I spent a lot of time afraid. And the problem with that is, in order for me to survive at home, I would sink into the background. Because as we all learned from Jurassic Park, the Tyrannosaur can't see you if you don't move.
Yeah.
Now, a big problem with that is if you go to school and you're the shy kid, well, guess who gets picked on? right? So my survival mechanism just to survive my home life blew up, radically in my face. And so it was torment at home and then torment at school and then torment at home and then torment at school. And I didn't know how to trust myself. I didn't know how to believe in myself. When people would ask me, hey, Josh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, oh my gosh, I want to be a marine biologist, or I want to do this or that. But that's stupid. Why would you do that? So already here I am, a terrified little kid. And now I'm unable to trust myself even more because the people I put on a pedestal, whether it be my folks or whether it be my siblings, right? They're telling me like, oh, well, that which comes from within you is dumb. And let me give you a better idea. And that led me for a really long time to look to others to tell me who I am. And it caused a lot of problems because, that's only an approximation, right? People have their own problems. And most often than not, people are also hiding from their own insecurities while telling us with a surety what we should do when they don't have it together themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's obviously going to cause us to, at best be a dog chasing its tail. Every once in a while, it might be a dog that catches the car. But then what do I do? Just like a dog, I caught a car. What do I do with this? I don't trust myself, so I don't know what to do with it. And so anytime I might walk into something that might be good for me, well, I would sense, oh, this is good for me. Well, wait a minute. What have I learned about what comes from inside? Oh, yeah, that's right. Let me reject that. And let me ask somebody else what I should do. And so that was real hard. And, growing up as a teenager, I'm sure every teenager has dealt with this. Hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? Hey, what are you going to do when you grow up? Hey, what are you going to do when you grow up? Hey, what are you going to do when you grow up? And for me, I didn't want to feel like a loser. And I was living with my brother and his wife at the time, who were both in the Army. His wife was going to DLI, the Defensive Language Institute in Monterey, California. And he was in Fort Rucker doing his, warrant officer training to learn how to fly helicopters. And so he'd call me, I talked to him, she talked to me as I was living there. Hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? Hey, you should join the Army. What do you want to do when you grow up? You should join the Army. Hey, what do you want to do when you grow up? You should join the Army. Hey, you know what? Maybe I should go join the Army, right? It's just one of those things that you just start to accept because it breaks you down. And the Army wasn't bad for me, but I've got a lot of the magician archetype energy, and magicians don't like to be pinned down. They don't like to be cornered. They don't like to be yelled at and told what to do without any way to escape. And that was rough for me. So needless to say, as a 19-year-old who had a chip on his shoulder, joining a totalitarian environment, there was a bit of a link that was broken between my brain and my mouth. And so when the signal was going beep, 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 hey, you shouldn't be saying this, I was already halfway through saying it. And so thank God it was the Army, not the Air Force, because I would have been broke. And so the Army just made me do a bunch of push-ups. And eventually that led me to, when I got out of the Army, I was able to start think back on my past, because I was no longer in the pain. I was no longer in that place where I felt like I was trapped, right? Because as a kid experiencing trauma, I felt trapped. So if you trap me, well, then I'm going to go back and revert to that kid. And no matter how much it hurts me, I'm going to act like a traumatized kid. And that's just not the way a soldier needs to be acting. And eventually what I was able to do is build these obelisks in time that I could look back to and say, right. And I didn't realize it was my trauma, but hey, Joshua, this is what happens when you think that you're the smartest person in the room. Because I certainly did. This is what happens when you think that you know more than those around you who have 20 years of experience. And here you come in with 6 months. You're like, well, I'm so brilliant. Didn't you guys know how brilliant I am? Let me tell you how brilliant I am. And so it really helped me to reflect back on that. And I find more meaning from that than I could have ever imagined. And so I got out in 2003. My first war zone actually was September 19th, 2001. Right? We had orders for 6 months. And then, what could happen in September 2001, right? And so 8 days before we deployed, September 11th happened, which again made me feel trapped. For 8 days before we deployed, we had nothing but CNN on repeat over and over and over and over and over and over, just repeating the cycle of violence of what happened. And it was pretty intense. And that was probably the most psychologically traumatizing that I felt psychologically traumatized I felt in the Army. I saw things I couldn't unsee, but it was just the radio. So it was like this disembodied voice that just echoed through, and my imagination just played with it. I could just see the planes crashing into the buildings constantly. And, I was going to a Muslim nation, and, the news was like, well, you should probably hate Muslims. Well, maybe you shouldn't. Well, you probably should. And so now I'm struggling with this, an existential crisis. Hey, what does this even mean? Have I even met a Muslim? Right? Am I just supposed to show up and be like, hey, I hate you, bro? Right? I've never met you, and I hate you because some guy who I've also never met, orchestrated an attack on my home country that I wasn't a part of, nor did I see, other than And so a lot of existential issues going on at that time. Then later, went to Kuwait and Iraq in 2003, and flew home actually July 4th of 2003. So that was nice. Yeah. But in a nutshell, that's really where a lot of my trauma came in. And then the PTSD just compounded with the childhood trauma. I didn't necessarily had the ability to see that in the moment, right? It's only now that I've been able to move past it, that I'm able to reflect back and start to connect the dots. Like Steve Jobs says, right? You can't really connect the dots unless you're looking back, whether that's through good things or bad things. Mm-hmm. And so
fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, because that's a lot of pain in your young life.
Yeah, for sure.
I think of it like literally like a crushing force, but crushing force produces diamonds, produces people who have a clarity and a persistence and that sort of thing. So
there's so many threads to pull from this. But the first funny thing I want to tell you is that I was the same rebel in the Army. And so when I was in basic training, it's not so much that I mind people telling me what to do per se, but if they're dumb orders, or I don't suffer fools well. Yeah. And so I had, in basic training, my dog tags were hanging out of my shirt, undershirt, t-shirt, whatever, just a little bit. And so we went down for inspection, and that's the only thing they could gig me for, because everything else was fine. Right. And so they said something like that, and I rolled my eyes at my drill sergeant because it was just so dumb. I'm like, oh. Did you just roll your eyes at me? Private, drop. So I was really good at push-ups when I got out of basic training too.
Oh my God.
I don't know what possessed me to join the military, being the rebel that I am, but I think it was a good training ground for future things now that I look back and reflect. I too went to DLI, so I know what you're talking about. That's cool.
Oh, okay.
And I'm a school counselor by day. And so what you describe in terms of your childhood is a sad realization that a lot of the bullies and a lot of the victims are already getting it at home. And that's why they're bullying, or that's why they're victimized. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's such a difficult cycle to break. It's almost like people smell weakness, like in the animals, they smell weakness. And so they prey. And it's such a sad commentary on our society. And I hope that education, I know that it's going to change later for the better, but sorry to hear that.
I just wanted to chime into it. You started talking about an old house, and how you can feel or hear the footsteps or hear things, and then the whole mirror aspect. It actually brought flashbacks for me, because I'm 54 years old and I still won't look at myself in the mirror when I walk past it at night. Because I am dead serious, because I don't know what's going to be staring back at me. And it's not it's an irrational thing. I get it, but it's still that thing that creeps me out. There are still things that creep me out in life. So, and that's just one of them. And that was from a young child. I mean, you get up in the middle of the night, you go to the bathroom, you have to walk past the mirror.
Mirrors are strange things.
So they are strange, because mirrors in magic and
scary movies,
different things, they're used to bring forth spirits. I mean, they're used to, or capture spirits, one or the other. Many, there are certain, if I understand it right, there are certain.
Isn't that called scrying?
I forget.
I think it's called scrying when they use the mirror to,
or
in a really dark,
surface.
in a really dark place.
There are certain, I think, religious or aspects that prescribe to that they will not hang mirrors or in certain locations, because they will capture the souls of those that look into them. So
very
interesting.
You put the drape, there'll be a drape nearby that they put over.
Yeah.
Anyway,
fascinating. But I think the most important thing that you brought up, Joshua, is this idea that we love to give away our power. We're trained to give away our power in everything. We give it away to our parents early on, understandably, but then we give it away to our coaches and our teachers, our priests, our pastors,
our friends, our best
friends, our neighbors, anybody but ourselves. And so that is really the hardest box to break out of. And that's good that you're probably working with your clients in that way through your own personal experience.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess I'm curious about so you've had this particular experience, but how do you go from being this traumatized, because then you're like, but then I could realize, but something happened to cause you to be able to have that inner reflection and begin to even separate and realize, because most people are just kind of, whirling dervishes, and they're just spewing out all of their, frustration and, I don't want to say hate, but, mainly frustration and hurt and all that kind of stuff onto everyone around them. So what's that thing that made you suddenly go, wow, look at what I'm doing? And what was the catalyst that made you start changing? What did you use to help you start changing?
Well, I mean, it was a decades long path that, a lot of, missteps and hurt. And I mean, I've been reading, since I was a teenager. I've been, devouring, like Aristotle, Plato, pre-Socratic works, Nietzsche as well. And you talked about, Samantha, the crushing force, right? Mm-hmm. Nietzsche has this idea that, we don't want to get rid of all of our chaos. We want to retain just a little bit of chaos in order to give birth to a dancing star. And so that's the way that I look at that crushing force, right? That's what happens. And that crushing force creates heat, and that heat creates a spark, and that spark creates a star. Mm-hmm. And
beautiful.
When I got out of the Army, I ended up getting married, with a woman who, I met just before I went to Iraq. So, we started to fall in love, and then didn't really have a real chance to do anything more than just the initial hormone stage. And so we made vows to each other then, without actually getting married yet. And then when I came back, I could feel I was a different person, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. And so I just kind of lost myself, kept my head down, and became a shadow of really who I was and who I could be. When we got divorced, it broke me, or at least I felt like it broke me. But the first thing that I did was, I had a big body length mirror, and so I'd shower, I'd come out, stark naked, nice visual for you, look in the mirror. And I just one day stopped, and I had this intuitive thought that I should look in the mirror until I can smile at everything I see. Right. Not just the
main things I teach my clients. You
That's
gotta be able to do that.
That's
well, and it's not just the pock marks, right? It's not just the moles, not just the dimples, not just the, whatever blemish, but also psychologically, right? Look into my own eyes until I like what I see. And so then a lot of my psychology starts, awakening a bit, and psychology mixed with fantasy as well, right? So, Einstein is a big fan of imagination, right? Because the mind doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality, that same neural pathways are going to fire. Well, that eventually led me to working, years later in pediatric medical research at the University of Utah for a few years. And then I took a brand new job in data analytics, also with Department of Pediatrics. And when I got hired on January of 2020, they said, "Hey, we're going to hire you because we don't know what we're doing. We need you, we need help, to have somebody figure it out for us." And again, what could happen in 2020? Right, that could radically reshape, especially with a brand new job, especially with the director, who's my my immediate supervisor, and that I have to report to, and I'm supposed to be helping all the heads of the tertiary clinics, all the neurologists, all the cardiologists, all the pulmonologists, with their data, their business forecasting. Well, there was a line that stuck with me, and it really harmonizes now with my spiritual path as well. But in any sort of data, large data sets, you've got to quiet the noise to increase the signal. Mm-hmm. And then I started playing with this idea of quiet the noise. Well, anatomically, where's the noise? Well, the noise is obviously in my head. And not just that, but that's also where all the details are. And where do we say the devil lives? Oh, okay. And so maybe that's the matrix that I've been caught in, is this matrix of noise. And the devil riding, just this little itty bitty ego just kind of riding me, because I haven't quite learned how to befriend the ego and dissolve it into something bigger and something greater. When the pandemic happened is when I realized just how political our healthcare system was. Like, I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that hijacked, if you will. And, a big thing that revealed it to me was, hey, everyone needs to wear masks. It's like, wait, I've just been watching the news for the last 2 months. They said masks are ridiculous, but now we're wearing masks. Okay, well, that's strange. Okay, well, I'll comply, right? I'm no longer that kid in the army. All right, everyone's gonna wear masks until we get the vaccine. Okay, so then everyone gets the vaccine and nobody says a thing about the masks. Well, that's strange. So now I have this opposing information about masks. We've all been vaccinated. Then there was a amnesty box where I could actually ask a question to the chair of pediatrics who knew me, right? And the chair actually wrote me an email that told me, Joshua, if you had a superpower, it's giving meaningful feedback and encouragement to others. Like during a pandemic, wow, that's a pretty awesome superpower to have. And so I asked him a question, hey, if masks are only here for us to get vaccinated, and now we're vaccinated, what gives? And instead of giving me a direct answer, he just said, well, we can't wait till there's more moderate voices being in charge of policy and yada, yada, and gave me a big word salad. And it kind of broke my heart a bit. And that's when I had my anchor that anchored me to, hey, you know what? I'm helping kids. No matter what darkness is going on in the world, I'm helping kids, even if it's, indirectly. And so that uprooted that anchor. And so now I'm kind of free floating. And eventually led me to there's a lot of chaos too. I moved out. I ended up getting a divorce from my second wife, but moved out of her house and bought my own house. And day one of me moving in, I moved above a tweaker, right? Because the decisions I've made and the path that I've decided to walk is one where chaos, just absolute chaos, shakes me out of my comfort zone. And so he would blast his speakers and shake my floor at about 80 decibels. And the cops wouldn't do anything for months and months. I'd be begging the HOA, the cops to do something, nothing. And so long story short, we got in an altercation. He pulled a gun on me. I don't know how it happened, but he ended up punching me in the face. I got control of the situation, and then I bloodied him up. And since I wasn't the worse for wear he was, well, then the DA ended up coming after me. And so then this all blew up in my face. And what it led me to, though, all this chaos, like what the hell else can happen? This is so terrible. Well, in the chaos, I was thinking to myself, how do I make order of this? Right? Who do I know? What reference point in my life do I know that I can look to help me out? I was like, oh, well, Jocko Willink, right? Here's this former, SEAL commander who's got his own podcast. I've seen him on Joe Rogan. So I started listening to him. And after about a month of listening to him, well, then he interviewed Jordan Peterson. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, because, I was a lefty. I was a huge lefty in politics. I was so avid in politics. And what's so funny about lefties is that we pride ourselves in free thinking, but then only think what thoughts are safe to think and don't allow ourselves to think our own thoughts. And so Jordan Peterson wasn't somebody, exactly. Jordan Peterson wasn't somebody who I really allowed myself to feel safe listening to. But now I'm in the care of Jocko, and Jocko is not going to serve me wrong. Sure. So as I was listening to Jordan Peterson's like, there's nothing here I can find fault with. And that led me to him listening to his biblical lecture on Genesis, where he secularized the Bible. And at this point, I identified as an atheist. And as soon as he started talking about how these are oral traditions that are now just able to start getting it written down on paper, mind blown. It's like the wisdom, the deep wisdom there, and the way that he articulated that these are metaphors and these are analogies in order to pass down this traditional wisdom to, from one person to another. They just made so much sense for me. And then with that context, it led me to the question, because, questions are the steering wheel of the mind. And if we want to get to a better place, ask better questions. Don't seek out better answers. And so the question I had was, is there room for God in my life? And that question within 2 weeks, it gave me a vision that completely changed my life.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. I'm just nodding and nodding.
There's
and
so many threads.
Jordan Peterson. Yes. Go.
Jocko, I understand. And yes, I've listened to quite a few of his podcasts. And I mean, he's an amazing man. I mean, he's done an amazing journey, and just the way he's been able to transform so many lives through his, from what he learned through the military and how he applies it to everyday existence is just absolutely amazing. So
fascinating what you just said, though, about asking better questions.
Yeah.
as you may or may not know, the origin story was just published, and I'm rereading it because we're creating a workbook. So I'm trying to take some notes. And plus, if I go on, I have to kind of know about the book, but there's so much information, it's hard to memorize. But anyway, something that sticks in my mind that I just read about that was the galactics telling us, and these are the source points for the universe. They're the high level galactic energies saying, humans get frustrated because they keep asking the same questions over and over of us or whoever. Mm-hmm. And they don't understand that once their consciousness ascends to the level that their questions start changing to what you really want to know, then you're not going to get the answers that you want. And they give this metaphor of, if you met a star and you wanted to go talk to this star, and somebody who's famous, you have all these questions you want to ask him. And when you get into his face, you're a blubbering idiot because you're so starstruck that you don't ask the right questions. And you don't. And it's the same when we channel or talk to or come into communion with the galactics or angels or whoever it is that we're communicating with. We get kind of starstruck sometimes and we don't ask the right questions. I loved how you brought that up. That was fantastic. So let's talk about then, keep going with your story in terms of, you found these key characters, these key people that helped you to change the way your worldview starts to crumble and you start to let in different information. And where did that lead then?
And that's pretty huge, because we all know there was such a amazing transition that occurred in 2020 with people who were
so many people
very much on that left side, just going, oh, wait a second, but it was happening to everyone.
Right. And I understand what you're talking about, as far as seeing, I'll say, the underpinning of the medical system, right? It's not unlike the underpinning of the Christian church, that kind of thing. When you get into the nooks and crannies of it, it's not like it's like any other organization, any other business. It has its, it has its ugly side. And for me, I was working in the tech industry here with our medical university of South Carolina here in Charleston. And I too found out that, that underpinning is all about money. Yeah. We were working and developing stuff for veterans health. And as soon as the equipment was ready to be deployed, and it was being deployed successfully, the immediate focus shifted to more money. And I'm like, oh, this is not.
Well, it's easy to do because we have such short-term memories. Have you ever seen the movie Dallas Buyers Club?
Yes.
With Matthew McConaughey.
Yes.
So it was all about getting low-cost, AIDS medication to poor people. And the antagonist, the evil villain of that movie, who prevented medicine from getting into saving lives. Yeah. Do you know what that guy's name was?
Yep.
Anthony Fauci.
Big F.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so these are known, but we have a short-term memory. So it's hard to say, it's hard to be able to pull that up, but continuing on with my story.
If you say something enough, right. Then it becomes the truth. So
yeah.
That sort of thing.
Exactly. Because the unconscious will eventually start accepting it.
Yeah.
So that question, is there room for God in my life? Well, within 2 weeks, I got a vision of a podium. Like it was big. I just closed my eyes and I saw this podium, and I knew by looking at a podium, there wasn't anyone there, but I knew that I was supposed to be on the business side of it, addressing a congregation of, not just anyone, but the LDS. Well, in the LDS, as a kid, I was raised as a secular kid, and, they had their own problems to go into, probably the most boring church service there is. Catholicism might, I don't want to offend anyone, but, mass is, mass and LDS, service, it's pretty boring. It's rough. And the people there are awesome, right? They're very nice. They're loving. They're great. They might believe things that I don't necessarily believe. But this was like, okay, well, how do I do this? Do I just show up at a church and say, hey guys, I got a vision pumped in my head from heaven. I'm just here to address you guys. So I hope you'll just let me take the podium and start addressing you. Yeah. So I started asking my friends, right, who grew up in the church, and then they let me know, oh, well, did you know that every first Sunday of every month, there's what's called the fast and testimonial meeting, where anyone who shows up, anyone can go and speak. It's like, really? And so the first 2 times, well,
church open mic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for about the same amount of time too, about 3 to 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
As an open mic. And so first time was just more of a, hey, thank you. I feel like I've been led here for a reason. I appreciate you guys accepting me. The second one was, and I'd been writing, editorials for a while. I've got, several published in the largest newspapers here in Utah. And so I wrote this editorial editorialized testimony of why love is stronger than hate. And so I gave that, and they loved it. They loved it. And by the third time is when I was really leaning in hard in some Jordan Peterson. And he said, probably the best thing you can do for yourself is create the highest ideal of goodness of which you can conceive, and then make yourself worthy of it by becoming it. And okay, well, I'm game. So what is my highest ideal of goodness? And so I created, again, an editorialized version of Gandalf, but not Gandalf in the mines of Moria fighting a Balrog that he didn't want to face in the first place, or a Gandalf who had to face off in front of the Witch King, who he also wanted nothing to do with, but the Gandalf who understood that, who saw what nobody else could see. And what he saw was that the hobbits were so full of love that it literally saved the world. The world, Middle Earth would have burned without those little children being able to hold on to the evilest thing known to man, because even the people around them were being corrupted by it. And if Gandalf hadn't seen that, if Gandalf's wisdom hadn't seen that, well, then again, the world would have burned. And so I created, Gandalf, and because I also did it purposely to create a bridge between the secular and the religious, right? Me being the secular, them being the religious. And so I called Gandalf Secular Jesus, and they were totally okay with it. Yeah, I saw Samantha giggle. Yeah. Well, and if you go to an LDS service, time after time after time, somebody will stand up and is like, brothers and sisters, I know in my heart that the Book of Mormon is the one true word of God. And I know in my heart that Joseph Smith is the one true prophet of God. And I know that Jesus is the one true Savior. And I say this as my personal testimonial. And the next person will say some approximation of the exact same thing. Next person will say some approximation of the exact same thing. So rather than me judge them, you'd be like, oh, look at these silly people. They don't even know what they think. I then, because of the wisdom of Jordan Peterson, the guidance, and the fact that I'm playing with this idea myself, you know what? They're probably telling me their greatest ideal of goodness. Well, what's my greatest ideal of goodness? Well, I know what that is. So let me answer that within my own mind and let me summon it. And within 6 months of doing that is when I met Peter Sage, my mentor. And I went through his 6-month program. He taught me all about consciousness, how I can influence reality with, frequency over chemistry, how psychology, neuroscience all points to how we can live our best lives by doing what Neville Goddard would say, right? Acting as if the wish were fulfilled and feeling, right, the wish fulfilled, rather than what most people do when they pray, please God, please give me, don't let me burn. Like, well, that's coming from scarcity. Yeah. And within 3 months of me meeting Peter, I met Ed Stracher, who he blew my mind, because he was saying some things I wasn't quite ready for. And I met him because we were doing a webinar, and he teaches people how to speed read. And I was like, boy, would that change my life? I am all in. So I was so excited, had my popcorn, not really, but basically. And I'm paying attention. He's talking about all these things. He's showing us these testimonials. And then he just says some bizarre thing out of the blue. Well, the reason why it's this way is because the world's run by 13 evil families. I was like, what just happened? What's going on? And then he mentioned reptilians and interdimensional demons. I was like, what is going on?
I just wanted to learn how to speed read. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
This is what I signed up for.
Yeah. But I couldn't get it out of my mind. And then not just that, but I had a little Gandalf statue where Van Helsing is right here. Mm-hmm. And I went to go use the bathroom in the middle of his thing. And just thinking to myself, man, what is going on? And as I'm in the bathroom, I hear a clunk clunk. It's like, well, that's weird. What's that? So as I wash my hands, come out, and I see Gandalf on the floor with his left foot broken off, the same left foot that's been giving me chronic issues. Like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So I reached out to him and was talking to him, and I felt like there was that wasn't coincidence, that my highest ideal of goodness is Gandalf. Peter Sage is basically turning me into the wizened scholar Gandalf. But I didn't realize until later that Ed was going to take me into the magical version of Gandalf.
Interesting.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I love those stories. It's never a coincidence. It's never, I mean, the synchronicity of Gandalf falling off the shelf and breaking the same leg that you're having trouble. I mean, you can't write this stuff.
Well, I thought you were going to say something happened in the mirror for sure.
Yeah.
Summon some new,
Right.
portal or
No,
something.
but
right?
I love that it's like Gandalf had become your avatar, your true north or
Mhm,
whatever. So
mhm.
everything was matching up to that, which is really just your higher self, the higher
Yeah.
personification of who you believe or who you desire to be.
Mhm.
I know
So,
this is a dumb
yes.
question, but Gandalf's from Hobbit, right?
Oh yeah,
But I have
noticed
not
you weren't
watched.
going. You're just kind of like.
I've heard the name, but I was supposed to read The Hobbit in 6th grade. I got this great copy of it. It's beautiful. I just could not get in. I couldn't get into it. I don't know. I don't
Gandalf
like
is
the
awesome.
fantasy fairy tale stuff personally when I'm reading. Never did read that. Terrible. I'm the only one on the
She
planet
missed
that
out.
doesn't know about The Hobbit.
Guess you're gonna have to learn.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
okay. So, and I did EMF, not in the same group as Josh, but I had done Joshua, sorry. And I had done EMF too. I kept trying to describe, like you said it succinctly. And all I could say to these guys, well, I'm doing the 6-month
Was Straker or whatever his name is?
No. This is with Peter Sage.
Peter
Oh,
Sage.
this wellness or this, exploration thing or whatever development. And I could never really describe it to him. So you just did that really well. And that's something they recommend is that little glass bottle thing he has there. Anyway,
A Flasca.
it's actually really
Oh.
cool. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
so you go from now you're having this experience with magical Gandalf.
Mhm.
And what happens next?
Ah,
You talk
so-
about the foot. You're
Yep. So just like any good businessman, right? I talked to Ed. I didn't necessarily follow up for about a week. And then so he sent me a free gift, right? Because he probably knew from talking to me, this kid is because he again said some things that was just like it was very hard for me to intellectualize, right? I had to work, I had to start suspending my need to decide what I felt or how I was going to define these words that he was saying. Because as I was talking to him, he's like, well, I don't sense any curses. I don't sense any black magic. I don't sense any demons. I don't sense any, negative soul contracts or, whatever. It's like, so how can I help you out? It's like, what? And I said, you know what, dude, I don't know. Like, I heard you talk. I heard you say those things. And how could I not follow up? I don't understand how one sequence of events wouldn't lead to me then talking to you. That just seems the most natural thing. And a thing I also left out that I forgot is that as I was thinking about following up with Ed, I'd been following Sadhguru for a little while, and he led me to Peter Sage. And as I was thinking, quieting the noise in my head, I literally heard an audible voice, right? Which means that probably wasn't audible. I swear it was audible in my right ear of Sadhguru's voice saying, life is about experience. You don't know, Joshua, what these words mean. They're so outside of your known, and anything that is unfamiliar, the mind's is going to start to sense threat. It's going to manifest a sense of threat. And and you don't want to be the kid who folds his arms and says, no, I don't like those vegetables. I've never tried, which is what basically everyone does with logical arguments. Well, that's not logical. Well, that's got no value for me. Let me just go ahead and dismiss that the same way a kid would dismiss vegetables. And so then I heard Sadhguru's voice saying, life is about experience. It's like, holy crap. So anyway, started listening to his free gift, which is about these magical meditations. Like, whoa, there's something here. Like, there is something here. And later on, I joined his program to actually teach us how to heal. But before that, he has us do his self-healing mastery, because as any great leader knows, you've got no business leading anyone anywhere that you haven't led yourself to that place.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm going through this. I'm feeling more love than I've ever felt. I'm probably crying daily for like 3 weeks, just letting go of so much garbage. And then this thought came to my head of sensory deprivation tank. Why? Because I watched a decent amount of Joe Rogan, and so I look up, hey, is there a sensory deprivation tank anywhere here near me in Salt Lake? Oh, there is. So I book a session, go in there, and I don't know what to expect. I've never been in one of these before, but again, I start looking. Hey, what are reference points that I can look at? And since I am somebody who's deep in fantasy, well, Well, Stranger Things came to mind. And Stranger Things is a TV show where there's this little girl who goes in the sensory deprivation tank and reaches into a whole new dimension.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm learning from Peter Sage, right, scientifically, why the world is a hologram. Okay, well, I'm game. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm going through my meditations. You know, I'm pulling in this divine energy from heaven and earth through me. I'm feeling more love than I've ever felt. And again, this voice, right? It comes, right? Not necessarily a voice, but kind of a voice, right? I'm sure that you're familiar with that. A feeling,
Mhm.
you know, this intuition that says, you know, Josh, you should summon the grossest, worst memory of your life. Okay, I'm game, right? Because I didn't really even need to think about it. All right, well, I've learned to trust this voice now. So just like in a hologram, whoop, well, there we go. I manifested this ugly memory, and then I manifested the 6-year-old version of me, who bore witness to this memory. And then I projected myself without even knowing what I was doing. I projected myself next to that little boy, and I held his hand. And my father, he divorced my mom when I was 2, and then had his own other family. And so I see him maybe once or twice a year, right? Barely. So he was pretty much checked out. And so any sort of parental love that I could get, I didn't get, because the ones who were there with me daily were drowning at the bottom of a bottle and rageaholics and alcoholics. And what up to this point, so my son was eight, something like that at this point. And what I realized is that learning how to love my son taught me how to love myself.
Mm.
And what I did was I literally took the love I had for my son and I gave it to this little boy the same way I would to my own little boy. And I didn't realize it at the time until I started unpacking it. Well, that was the day that I learned how to become my own dad. Right? I didn't need to get the approval of my parental figures, because I could do that for myself.
Yeah.
And what I did is I took that gross memory and I filtered it through all this love and my own awareness. And I started unhooking and started detaching from all the BS that I had accepted that was my fault. And then I passed it back to myself. And then when I knelt down, I embraced him and told him, well, I love you. And I just broke down crying.
Mhm.
And what I did there, I didn't realize it until I started doing my own summit and interviewing, experts from around the world who do spiritual healing, shamanism, is that this is what shamans call soul retrieval.
Mhm.
And it was just my intuition that guided me how to do this.
Yep.
Wow, all that in a deprivation
Well, I was
tank.
about to say, this was while you were in the
Was that
deprivation tank.
one
Yeah.
Be careful, people.
That was one single session.
That was
Yeah.
one single session. Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
And there
Big-
is a float tank for those of you who watch this local
Yeah,
down
oh,
in Charleston.
in Charleston. Yeah.
Mhm.
There, we've done it. I've done it a number of times, and the first time for me, it was just getting used to floating like that, completely, suspended, because your
Without
natural,
analyzing.
yeah, that and just your natural instinct is you don't want to lay your head back because your head is going to submerge, but there's so much buoyancy in it that you can go completely limp.
And
This-
you do literally lose track of time.
Yeah.
So you're waiting. Is it time? Like how much time has passed? You can't see, you
No.
can't hear anything. You're waiting for the little ding or whatever to
Mhm.
wake you back up.
The second time though was much better. Did have some journeys with that, but that's where I really could just release and just let myself completely go
Mm.
weightless in it, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So
Wow.
So now that we kind of fast forwarded through your own healing, you're telling us the mechanism by which you were able to heal some of that childhood trauma, which is fantastic.
Mhm.
And so now you've taken on the role of helping others to heal as well. And you say that you do that by healing the soul. So
Yeah.
tell me what that looks like for you when you work with clients. How does that manifest?
Well, so first thing, you got to quiet the noise, right? And so that comes with deep meditation. And where that can be somewhat problematic is that people often feel like they meditate wrong, or since they don't necessarily meditate much, well, then again, there's that feeling of perceived threat because it's unfamiliar.
Mm.
And so I've got to be able to guide them in a way that allows them to just relax. And I didn't realize until I started talking to my friend who's a hypnotherapist that a lot of what I just naturally started doing really coincides with a lot of hypnotherapy.
Mm.
And just the way that I guide people, the way that I help them get into that comfortable state and that relaxed state. And once we relax our mind, well, then we can really get into our heart. And our heart is where we can then link up with our soul. And our soul knows things that we just don't know.
Mm.
Right? Our soul knows things so much more beyond what we don't know. And I really love a lot of the way that Dolores Cannon talks about the soul, how, it's, if you think of God as just this light, this gargantuan amount of light, and the tiniest spark of that light breaks off, and that's what becomes a soul. Well, then that means I've got, that's what Rumi said, right? I'm the ocean in a drop. And so now if I quiet the noise, right, because the mind is so convinced of its own brilliance, and again, so convinced of if it's not logical, it has no value. And so quieting that, then just allowing them to surrender to the experience, surrender to something higher, surrender to their great I am. Well, then I guide them into connecting to heaven, connecting through earth, going through their whole body. So connecting through all their chakras, introducing flow, right? Because the way that I look at a lot of our chronic problems, whether it's, mental PTSD, right, mental, distress, depression, or just chronic pain in the body, right? People like Bessel van der Kolk or, Gabor Mate are really talking about how these are just trapped emotions in our body, trapped energy in our body. Well, when things quit flowing, right? Like water, if water quits flowing, well, it stagnates. And what's attracted to stagnating water? Well, you get mosquitoes, you get parasites, you get bacteria, you get viruses. And what do these things do? Well, they either poison the bloodstream or they drain the blood supply. And well, the Hermetic philosophy talks about as above, so below. So if you heal the soul, you'll heal everything down, but also as below, so above. So these mosquitoes, well, then as we go up, well, then do we have evidence of these, germs or these viruses in the mind? Well, sure, especially as Americans. Walk into any room full of people, especially if they like each other, and say one of three names. You don't have to say anything else but a name. You can say Hillary Clinton, you can say Barack Obama, or you can say Donald Trump, and people will lose their minds, just like they're getting possessed by an agent of the Matrix. And immediately they know exactly, exactly how to heal everything, how to fix everything. They know exactly why this person's a terrible person or why they're not. Well, then, in the spiritual realm, why we even though we can't see them, well, they also exist. And while nobody knows the truth of the capital T, but the point here is to create a map that actually helps us, right? If I'm driving somewhere that I've never been to, well, I'll pull up GPS. GPS is not the roads that I drive on, but it's a meaningful way for me to get to my destination from one point to another. And so what I do then is as I intervene and help connect them with this divine flow, well, it gets rid of the stagnant energy, right? In the same way that if you have a dirty drop of water and drop it in the ocean, well, now it's clean, right? So now, just like a raging river, taking that stagnant pond and taking it downstream, well, now the breeding ground is not there. And so then I take them through how to reject them and how to get rid of these nasty, paranormal parasites, so to speak.
So you're doing this
Wow.
through visualization.
So
Is there energy healing involved or anything like that? Or is it mainly visualization or?
it's both because, what did Bob Proctor say? If you can hold it in your mind, you can hold it in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And so while 99% of what I do is heart, right? Feel it, know it. Even if you can't feel it in your heart, just know that it's happening. And if you see it, great. If you don't, hey, no big deal, because, visualization is 1% of it. However, visualizing can make things more powerful for people. And if they can truly see themselves in that state of perfect health and see that healing happening while they feel it, well, that just magnifies it.
I think it's interesting because I love synchronicities. And on my way up here, have you ever heard of Tyler? Oh, I can't remember his last name. But he channels Ryok. He's like, Bashar.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard of Bashar.
Yep.
Okay, so
Daryl
he's
Anka,
another channeled being from the Essassani culture.
Okay.
And so, but this channeling, which he'd never done public before, and I guess he just recently released it, was from Ryoka. And so he's accepting the fact that now he is channeling different beings, not just this one. But anyway, that's all, whatever. But one thing that he said, and I don't know how he got to this in his conversation, but he started talking about pain and whether it's mental or physical pain. And they said, that the common spiritual philosophy right now is, we're talking about, well, you have these blocks and you're resisting something. What is it you're resisting? And he said that was not, that is not a way to look at it. The preferred way to look at it is the flow. Why isn't it flowing? Not focusing on what the resistance is, but why isn't there the flow? So that it just, the energy shifts when you talk about, well, where is this flow? Why is this flow not occurring? You know, I just thought, and it's hitting me deeper now that I'm repeating it back to you, because I just remember when he said it, for whatever reason, it just stuck in me. And I was like, okay, mental note. I don't know.
No, I love
I just
that.
found that fascinating that you brought that up, that it's teaching them that flow.
Well, and for the last, 8 months, I've really been studying the Tao Te Ching and devouring it. And I'm putting on a webinar on the 29th of July, the wisdom of the Tao. Not that I myself am Lao Tzu, right? But I certainly can share love with Lao Tzu and connect with the spirit of Lao Tzu, because spirits are eternal. And so from the way in which I've been able to see flow heal people, and then understand how the Tao Te Ching is nothing other than how to get into a flow state in every part of our lives. Now, when you talk about resistance, though, there is a fascinating verse in the Tao Te Ching that does talk about that. And it really helped me a lot in my own, angsty, angry teenager who stayed with me for far too long than he should have. But there's this verse that when man is born, he's soft and supple. When a plant is born, it's soft and pliable. When a man dies, he's stiff and rigid. When a plant dies, it's dry and brittle. Therefore, those who are stiff and rigid, or rigid and inflexible, are disciples of death. And those who are soft and flexible are disciples of life. And, far too often we see people who are praying with rigidity. It's gotta happen. Or, the Southern Baptists, right? I was stationed in Kentucky, Fort Campbell. And so, boy, oh boy, right, they will be spitting some hellfire at you and very rigid in their beliefs. And I understood then why I could get to an emotional feeling that it felt good, but could never get to the spiritual level of actually having it heal me.
Yeah.
That is fascinating.
Perfect. It is. Yeah. I like that. And our time has flown.
Yeah.
What can viewers expect in your webinar coming up? Because we're hoping that this will broadcast in time for them to sign up with you. What
Yes.
like?
So really, I'm just hoping to help people find that flow state by understanding that this isn't just some old, Chinese dude who wrote this in, 400, BCE, and, that it has no value, right? I mean, you could even look at, the Tao Te Ching is the book of the way. Well, what did Jesus say? I am the way, I am the truth, and I'm the life. Well, Jesus is, where did he disappear from a young child, right? When the king was trying to murder all the children, he disappeared until he was 31. Well, a lot of people say he went, back east and went over to India and, or Indonesia. And in fact, the Dalai Lama will actually talk about that as well, as I understand. And so it seems that Jesus is also somebody who flows with the Tao, in that, the Tao talks about, if, and this is really maybe a big takeaway that I'd like people to have, is that, give evil nothing to oppose, it'll go away on its own, not because it's not there, but because you can step out of the way. And if you think of that in the eyes of Jesus and how Jesus acted, not the Bible, not the way that the Bible's written, not all the rules and all the regulations, but when we see Jesus in action, right? When we see that these Pharisees came up and said, hey, Jesus, key into their friends. Hey, we're gonna get Jesus to say something so we can kill him. Hey, which one of these commandments is the best commandment? And he said, well, love God with all of your basically mind, body, and soul, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And there's nothing that they could do. Right? He didn't oppose them. He didn't tell them they were stupid. He didn't get rigid. He just softly and flexibly bent to the wind that was presenting itself. And just like the Tao, he stepped out of the way of evil. And so that's really what I hope people to take away from, is that this isn't just words that some dude wrote down that has no value because they're old. These are timeless. And no matter when they were written, right? We've seen great masters exemplify and live and embody this wisdom. And, if we are all the ocean in a drop, well, we can all do that too.
Fantastic. So how can people find you, and how can they sign up for that webinar?
Yeah. So best way to reach me is actually through, go to freemefrompains.com. That's my website. And then we can chat. I'll go ahead and get you there's actually a healing plan there. I can talk to you and then get you introduced to the webinar. You can check me out on Facebook, Joshua Cameron as well. But the easiest way is going to be freemefrompains.com. And then that way I'll have a link up there how you can actually get signed up to the webinar. And then if you know that you want to work with me, well, then let's chat and have a healing plan, get that set up and get you going.
Beautiful. We'll put all of those links below.
Yep.
And we're so grateful that you spent time with us and chatting with us and helping us to get to know you better and sharing your wisdom and love with our audience. We thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate the space.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joshua.
Oh, you're
And
welcome.
thanks to all of our viewers for sharing your time with us here on Out on a Limb podcast. Until next time.
See you guys.